Hello, welcome everyone. We're going to do this starting sitting down just so we're kind of at your level. This is supposed to be a bit of a fireside chat, so that's why I'm sitting down and not standing up. My name is Heather Gilmartin-Adams. I'm from Red Thread Research, and I'm hosting this panel with Meredith Wellard from Deutsche Post DHL, Peter Sheppard from Ericsson, and Matthias Schmidt from Swisscom. Welcome and thank you all. I'm not going to give extensive introductions, they're going to do it themselves, but welcome and just thank you very, very much for being here and for spending this time together. We have a number of prepared questions, so we're going to spend about the first 30 minutes, 45 minutes with me asking some prepared questions, then we'll open it up to the audience. But if something strikes you and you really just need to ask this question now, please raise your hand and we'll make it a little bit interactive. We hope to focus today on the practicalities of actually implementing a skills philosophy in organizations. With that, would you mind, Meredith, starting by introducing yourself and the skills program at Deutsche Post DHL?
Yep, so hi everyone, Meredith Wellard. I head up the group Learning, Talent and our HR platforms for Deutsche Post DHL out of Bonn. I think probably what I bring to this discussion is our journey from really describing a problem that we have with not knowing how to strengthen our internal talent marketplace, so to increase the ability for our internal recruits to really answer the question of, do you have the skills? All the way through to where we are today, where we've implemented our new platform. Well, it's not a new platform, it's actually the Cornerstone. We've had them for a while, but the new functionalities that we now have available with the capabilities, skills graphs, and some of the recommendation engines that are brilliant. And yeah, I want to share that journey, the pain and the pleasure that's come with that. So, yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Peter?
Okay, thanks so much, and welcome from the uncomfortable seats here. My name is Peter Sheppard. I head up our global learning ecosystem at Ericsson. And it's one of my roles in one of my jobs is that I look after the global job and skills infrastructure as well. And we were chatting, as to how do you get into all this? Why are your companies pushing you to do this? And I'll give you a couple of examples. The first example is that our head of people for networks said to me, Peter, we recruit over 9,000 people just into the networks of Ericsson. And we spend a huge amount of time, effort and pain bringing those people on board. And then in month 2, we've lost it. We've lost the information about the skills that those people have. And it's that sort of example that is creating pain for us in the organization that is, I'm not solely going to try and sort out, but we are trying, with a whole lot of people in our organization trying to sort out. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic, thank you. Matthias, right?
Yeah, Matthias from Swisscom, the telecom operator incumbent in Switzerland. We have around 19,000 employees. And we've been very innovative and also progressive towards looking at what is work today and what work might be in the future. And skills has been all around since, I wouldn't say centuries, but over the last 10 years. And looking at work is, looking also at skills. And here I'm trying to bring in a bit about how we redefine the skills and also redefine work in a sense. And to give an example, and actually what we try to solve is 3 different problems. On the micro level, it's for the employee to explore a bit more about what the employability is of the employee today going forward. On the meso level, this is about the teams and how the dynamics play out with one team to another, tackle this, or even the support functions. And on the macro level, it's obviously to build the capacity and also capabilities to be still in the business as a telecom operator.
Thank you. Okay, so Meredith, in our prep call, we talked about this problem of generating some sort of holistic understanding of what an employee's skills are and why that's important to do and why it's difficult to do and how you're going about doing it at Deutsche Post DHL. Can you talk a little bit about those elements, the why, the challenges, and your approach?
Yeah, I can, for quite some time. Okay, so I think everyone's familiar with what's going on in the world in terms of accessing capabilities that are, more advanced in terms of the skills that we require for the future. We had launched our strategy 2025, and along with that, a digitalization program, which was across all parts of the business, but with a big focus on HR. And we reviewed all of our providers, everything like this. Ended up in a space where the comp and ben area were building a job architecture, which was a game changer for us. They completed it all over quite some period of time, and they came to me and said, we're thinking about putting in reference jobs, and yeah, but we've got no use case. And I was like, I would die for some reference jobs with skills attached. And we were like, oh, that's a big job. How do you do that? Skills taxonomies. You build them for 3 years, and then you use them for 6 months, and then they're out of date. And at that very time, there was some new technology coming out that did this parsing of the external market and took the data points, brought them together into some understandable themes and presented skills back to the business. And we said, we'll test a few of those out and see how it goes. Also, what came along, which was very impressive, was this idea that once you had a skills profile, so if you had an algorithm or machine learning that offered you a skills profile, that you then had the ability to match those skills against learning or against job offers or against career pathing. And you've seen this probably in some of the providers. What we found particularly interesting is if we attached skills to our reference jobs, we had almost an internal skills ontology that we could keep static for a period of time. The intention is always to review it. We're looking at a 3-month cycle. But static enough that we could then allow our employees to select skills profiles, a little bit LinkedIn style, and then understand the gap between where they are today and where they want to be tomorrow. But even more exciting for us was we could then say, you know what, there's someone who's sitting out there in Tutgaruk, which is a place in Australia, by the way, who has a skill that we need in Japan. And actually make that connection on a job level, right? So you almost have that ability to search your own internal marketplace for capabilities, not based on role, not based on title, not based on function, but really on the skills that you need and where they are needed, and then approach them and offer the job. Or better still, well, not better still, probably an alternative is to say, we don't have enough of those skills, we know we don't, and the future is going to require an increase. Let's do some intentional, targeted interventions to close those skill gaps. And they can be as small as automated recommendations via the AI on online learning, or as large as really learning pathways, quite intense exchanges in roles and so forth. So we loved it. It was really for us, it's going to touch the business in terms of our future, our capability and sustainability. It's going to touch the business in terms of our value. We calculated a return around just simply reducing onboarding and skills development once placed in role, and really, we're a large company, we're 600,000 people, but it was a big number. So that was the, and then the third thing, which you touched on, Matthias, was that what it means to be an employee. When we first did a proof of concept, the employees were blown away. They were really saying things like, don't close it down, don't close the test system down, which was completely vanilla, had no branding, and they just loved it. So it's engaging, it makes them feel like someone's looking and someone cares, about what they're investing in. So I know I talked a lot, but one last thing, I do have a vision. My vision is that we can almost, for each and every employee use out of manufacturing, I don't know if anyone's from manufacturing, but I like this idea of the digital twin, right? If I could create a digital twin for each and every sort of employee profile, and then when a job comes open, say there's a digital twin that matches the profile we want, and there's the next 5 candidates that match that, and not until that actually get shortlisted do they say there's the name, there's the gender, there's the location, there's the religion, there's the, whatever the different diversity factor might be. So it completely, reduces bias by quite a significant extent. So that's my dream. Yeah.
Anything that you want to add? Especially this idea of the holistic, having a holistic understanding of skills, of an employee's skills.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got a similar dream. We must be having the same sort of dreams. What we've been trying to achieve is, can you have a consolidated view, a single view of what somebody is capable of? And that is, and that kind of almost, what is the best of me? And because at the moment, what we have in Ericsson is we have lots of different systems, as I'm sure many of you do, and we have lots and a slightly different profile sitting in each one of them, slightly less or more accurate in each of those. And can we get to the point where we have a one view of an individual, in some ways in the way that we use our LinkedIn profiles, but also maybe even utilizes that. Now, if we can do that through inferring the skills, through aggregating the skills, and then I think employees will start to really see the value, and that's, I think, one of the challenges around this is you've got to be able to show business and individual value. And just like Meredith is saying, we've been wanting to show that if I can show the best of me, then that will enable matching to be done through talent marketplaces. We use AFOL, but whatever talent marketplace you've got, it enables that, and that's a real something for the individual. And when we've been talking about career development in organisations, often it's websites and webinars. And what I think people are looking for is some actual help with finding their next move. And if you can get the skills right, then that's a real benefit. And it's about having that really one view of the person.
So I think to the point, Meredith, you mentioned about it's also about inclusivity, and it's not just the hard stuff. So the employee ticks all the boxes and being heard and being asked the relevant question of what is the skill? Is it the soft side, which is actually very hard, and the hard side, which you have all sorts of reference bodies, certifications where you can say we rather trust third party data in the sense, okay, there's technologies we work with, and even they come up with their certifications. It's like a driver license for AWS or Microsoft. So in a sense, you rely on those vendors as well, but making sure that the employee has space to explore also the soft side for him or herself is very important in this skills game.
Do you want to talk about how you're doing that?
Oh, so this relates a bit to where do we get the data from? And I said before we started the session, it's not we don't turn to systems, we turn to people first, because they are the data generating machines and they turn to systems, they interact with systems, they expose their data, what they want, the intent, and they also perform their work within. So in looking at those systems, as Peter, to your point, there's sorts of data spurs all over. And looking at that and seeing where's engagement is what we see in our systems right now as the learning experience platform is something, the system people go and come back and apparently they have a trust in the system. So, and get something in return. This was our pivotal point to start this skilling journey, saying pick their skills and what is the learning you attach to it that people develop those skills.
We actually use this concept internally of skills as the currency, which you've probably heard before, but data is the price of entry, right? So if you want to participate, you raise your hand and say, I'm prepared to share my data, because and only in that way can we get that personalisation and really valuable solution for them. That's not always easy to.
And that solves some of the data privacy
Yes,
challenges
it does.
as well, right?
Yeah.
So Nick, next prepared question, Peter, can you explain how you're tackling the build of a new jobs and skills architecture at Ericsson? What challenges should some of our audience expect?
Yeah, sure. So the one thing is we're not trying to do it as L&D and just L&D. And those of you that were in the Fosway thing this morning will have heard the same thing. So, the program that I run on this includes literally all of the people or HR functions in it. But more importantly, actually, it includes the business. We have a global resource management function whose responsibility is to place people out in the business, and their involvement is absolutely critical to us. So I think one thing we said from the outset is we want, this needs to involve, this is a horizontal people function activity that includes the business. The second thing is we've tried to keep it, and this is kind of a complex area, difficult area, but it's somewhere that we've tried to, as much as we can, make it simple. We do not talk about ontologies or taxonomies. We use that words between us maybe, but what we talk about is skills intelligence, because that kind of means something. There's understanding which are the adjacent skills, which are the emerging skills, and so on, is really valuable skills intelligence, and people kind of get that immediately. So using words that connect, and we talk about skills catalog, a structured, hierarchically based catalog. That's effectively what a taxonomy is. So that's what we've been trying to work with. And the other thing that we've had is that we wanted to achieve a level of automation through this, and we wanted it holistic as well. I.e., we wanted to connect we wanted to focus on the job architecture at the same time as the skills architecture, because they're both interconnected so much, because we want skills at the heart, if you like, of our job profiles and our job descriptions, the way we describe our work. Final thing I would say on it is that don't try and boil the ocean. And I can tell you we've made that mistake. There's a little bit of, we've gone too far too fast. And we're pulling back a little bit to more experiments and POCs. So we want to, that ability to create that aggregated skills profile, that ability to automate the creating of that catalogue of skills in a particular area. And we've picked an area where we've got a skill shortage, because we want to find, and that happens to be for us in the cloud area. So cloud is increasingly important in telco networks, and we need to be able to understand who are the people who've got the adjacent skills, because then we can actually run a reskilling program for those people. And if we're effective in that, we can go back to the business and say, actually, do you now see the value? And that's, so running of POCs, experiments, whatever you want to call them, great way, I think, of getting off the ground with this type of work.
I think there's something you triggered in my mind when you were talking about the complexity, because if you think about these skills, the machines that are creating these skills ontologies, and there's one in every platform. I've got like 8 platforms that are global, and for the first time, those 8 platforms, by the way, sat next to each other for a long time, perfectly happy. But now we're looking at them and going, we can't have 8 different skills ontologies, working along these. So how do we start to revision our, sort of landscape and the architecture setup and even the integrations, because now we want more two-way integrations and so forth, so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot, so to speak, by moving too quickly, because that was what you nailed. Don't go so fast, and don't be, thinking I can do it in my little island and they'll do it somewhere different. No, it has to be on a big scale, right? It has to be for a country, it has to be for a full function, or it has to be for a globe. But it can't be that this team does it and that team doesn't. It won't work, and the user experience will be atrocious. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I do think the user experience, getting that, that you're getting those skills running through different systems, whether it be your talent marketplace, whether it be your LXP, that whole piece running through that gives that common experience. I want to recognize the role that I do. I want to recognize it, whatever system I'm in.
Yeah, in terms of the system architecture, I think it's very important to differentiate between systems of engagement, systems of record, systems of intelligence. And if you look at digital transformation as a whole, you can pinpoint out where sits which system, and not all the systems should have all the data inside, right? So it's about the time, also the timestamp when you got this data point, and then how valid is it and how long is it valid? If you have performance or skill calibration reviews every once a year, this is like many things happen in 1 year. So I think this is also crucial to remember, to look at the various data streams and the quality of what they have, and then also decide which problem do you want to solve.
Yeah.
A sort of follow-up question. In the pre-call, actually in our pre-chat, we were talking about partnering with vendors to help establish some of these data flows that need to happen. And I love this point that not all data needs to go everywhere all the time. So can you talk a little bit more about how you're working with these 8 different providers to figure out and actually establish the connections? And I'm sure it's happening in all your organizations.
Yeah, I mean, at least for us, it's really about understanding, which is the one that we really find is the most powerful and, provides the broad. Okay, so if I take a step back, there were 2 key outcomes for us. One was the talent solution, and the other was the learning solution. And we had the big LMS already, we had the big talent and performance module from Cornerstone, and it was a natural sort of next step to enhance the capability piece and build the skills graph out. Where it got interesting is we also have, of course, a TXP and our ATSs, and they had started to offer these ontologies. So then we had a recruiting experience and a candidate experience that was different to the internal experience, and here's where we get a bit of a disconnect. So it's about deciding, exactly as you say, which one is the single source of truth when it comes to skills. And by the way, they're all fluid ontologies, so it's not that they come with this fixed line and we can't use that anymore. It's just about how you make sure that they're feeding each other or feeding at least one way, rather than giving users, and it goes back to the user experience. I don't want to have a profile in the recruiting platform and then a profile in the learning platform and then a profile in the no.
I think that's a good point to make. Like, as a worker, do you want to exist in all of those systems? And from a Swisscom point of view, we see lots of trust in those systems. So apparently we do something right, that people trust those systems and the procedures and also the governance around. And to your point, do we connect all the data? No, we don't. Then we decide, as you said, what is the price of the problem we want to solve, and then we start to build it out based on that. Yeah. Rather than saying, okay, we need to put it all in a system, and then the control of who has the system is very powerful. And who has data has responsibility, who has more data has more responsibility.
Our proposal is that we make the whole experience as seamless as possible. Totally seamless, so that the user doesn't even know which platform they're on, right? But they literally should just know, I'm doing learning now, I'm applying for a job now, I'm ordering my payslip now. The experience works. I don't need to keep a list of links in my email box. Oh, where do I find the link for?
And actually finding the integrations between the different systems is key here. We're working on at the moment an integration between our talent marketplace, which is Eightfold, as I mentioned, and Degree, which is our LXP. So, can you give an end-to-end experience there where if I'm in the Eightfold Career Hub thinking about my next job, then the recommendations of learning are coming into Eightfold. And then also, eventually where we want to get to, of course, is that the vacancies are then also surfaced in Degree. So you've kind of got the systems all working with each other. I think also there is an opportunity as well. There is to use some companies. There are some companies out there, and they're being highlighted, I think, during these couple of days, that enable you to have almost like a translation layer, if you like, before your single source of truth. So you've got all your skills in one place, but where do you get your skills from? And if you've got a system as well that's sourcing those and inferring them and aggregating them and then sticking them all in one place to then be utilized across the organization, then that's a great way to work. We're not there yet. I mean, this is work in progress.
So then actually the next prepared question is for Matthias, and we've already touched on it a little bit, so I'll ask what else you might like to add. Where are you getting your data about skills, and how are you pulling the data into one place?
Yeah. So as I said before, we turn to the people first. So we ask them deliberately, what do you want to develop? What do you care about? Because we care about people as well. And of course, various onboarding systems, they have the opportunity to ingest their skills by text kernel, but they also can pick it from a list, from a menu, so to say. So making it easy and setting up this, make sure you use the taxonomy that is in place to create a common ground. To other systems, what we have tons of systems. To name a few, it's the internet profile. Everybody, I'm new at this company, I fill out my internet profile, but I never touch it again. Then we have a very interesting one, which is a crowd-based knowledge base, so people can ask questions and they get responses to it. I think it's less scientific, and it's not about adding to the knowledge, but about practitioner skills, like where do I get what from, how do I set up a cloud server, how do I solve a very work-specific problem. So I think this is also around this, how to get the job done and the work done, and not just boiling the ocean. As you said, we could think about the next cloud server on Earth or on Mars, and how do we approach it. I think this is a different problem, and where you, at least from a system point of view, you can sense where is the knowledge you situated on, that you then aggregate, maybe not in systems, but also in communities and social aspects of what work is also about, right? It's not about just using one system, it's also coming together, solving a problem, wicked problem.
And you had actually mentioned using ceremonies as well as a sort of natural cadence for gathering skills. Right.
Yeah, this is this idea around how do we structure and organize work. And around 5 years ago, we departed on this agile journey. Everybody probably has as well to a certain extent. And there's tons of ceremonies, roles in place, which we try to piggyback upon because they have a regular cadence and a drumbeat. And this is not the drumbeat every year, but every tact, so to say. And this is in much shorter time frame, so you get a better sense of what is happening where. And we have a playbook in place, so check in, check out questions where we also try to surface this idea of think about your skills and not just pushing it out to learning, but making it part of what work is, right?
Yeah, thank you. All right, Meredith. Many organizations rely on employees to provide data. Oh, well, we've already touched on this a bit, but what would you like to add? Rely on employees to provide data about their skills, as Matthias was just saying, and struggle when employees don't provide this data. Have you had this challenge, and how are you addressing it?
To be honest, we haven't had the challenge. And I guess it is early days still, so we have hit the audience that traditionally engages with our talent platform and knows how to use the system and knows the value of making themselves visible for roles and so forth. We intend to expand it out to every employee, so all of our frontline supervisors, our frontline employees out on the field, and that will be new to them because they're also the lower users of LinkedIn, and they use job boards and some of the ratings boards, but they're less inclined to. We believe our hypothesis is that they're less inclined to do that by nature, and therefore we're looking at ways that we can simplify the method, right? So rather than going on and being introduced with, here are a set of skills that you might have, pick the ones and then add extras, which is how it works at the moment, that they would go on and go, I already have a set of 6 skills already embedded in my skill profile. I can drive a van, I can, follow health and safety guidelines, whatever they are. And only after discussions with their manager, for example, or other things, that they'll be coached into then enhancing their profile. So it's a little more hand-holding. But the concept is that they need to see the value first. So if they get a set of skills by default, then they get learning recommendations, then they get some nice things that come to them, then they have a conversation with their manager, then it becomes like, I get one, there's a job offer actually, there's something. Because, as I said before, we have 600,000 employees, 270,000 of them are frontline, warehouses, drivers, and a big chunk of those, we assume, are doing that part-time or because they didn't have another choice in the moment, or they're a refugee, or the husband or wife of someone who's, and they could absolutely, just through some targeted development, move up the organisation in terms of skills and roles that they might have access to. So imagine that, we have an unfair advantage, we don't have to go to the external market if we can really build our own internal marketplace. So that's...
I like this equity idea of exploring this talent that you have and working with it.
They love the company, why would we not?
Exactly.
Peter.
Right, so
So I might skip down. So tell me if you think you've already answered this question, because I feel like we've already covered a lot, which is fantastic. I love that we're sort of, we're prepared. What's your view on targeting a specific group of strategic skills first versus a more all-encompassing approach? So you mentioned that you sort of went forward and now you're pulling back, and how does that?
Yeah, we've kind of not touched on this one really, because we wanted to do both here. We wanted to be, 2 main areas that we've been working on around skills. One is around the infrastructure and architecture piece that I've talked about, but also identifying what are the critical skills to our company. What is going to see Ericsson succeed in the next few years? And I know a lot of companies try and think about that, and think about it from a skills perspective. Now, of course, in an ideal world, you would have your skills taxonomy all sorted, done and dusted in your systems and so on, and then you get to your critical skills. But work is, and our companies are not like that. Yeah, so we value, if you like, progression over perfection is the way I always like to say it. So what we've done is that we've gone ahead, we've worked with the strategy teams in Ericsson, we've worked with the executive teams in Ericsson to identify 7 critical skill areas. And those critical skill areas we are using to build learning journeys that we are then putting into Degree, so they are visible. We of course market those, but perhaps most interesting what we're doing is that we're trying to look at the skill progression that people get as well in those critical skill areas, because one thing is identifying them, but actually, are we making any progress? And so that's and so we actually put in place targets and key results around those 7 critical skill areas that we've got. And to Matthias's point, we are also Come back to me in a moment.
Yeah. Do you have your water?
Yes,
Well, so I want to give you a chance to finish, because I think it's interesting. Also, you mentioned earlier the cloud was one of the targeted skill areas, and so I had a question around how did you identify that? Was that part of this process? And I think one of the questions that we heard as we were talking to the audience before is this question of measurement, right? So if you have identified the levels for these key skill areas, how are you thinking about going about potentially measuring those?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the way we think about the measurement of this skills progression is kind of through three types of skill measurement, if you like, three buckets. So you've got the inferred skills that an individual's got, and that often typically we get through the project responsibilities and roles that person's had. Then there's that good old self-assessed area and manager-assessed area that everybody's always a little bit cynical over. But what we try and do is take that from multiple locations. So we have an internal system that focuses on skills, but we also have degrees as well. So we actually combine both the information in a data warehouse, and then we map that in Tableau. So we have that kind of self-assessment now. For Ericsson's a very technical company, and what of course matters in a technical company is that you have credential. So we actually, when it really matters over, for example, our radio access network or whatever, then we have exams, and we have certifications that we do. So, but we combine all that in terms of understanding progress, as well as, I should say, progress through the learning journeys as well that we create. Put that together, then you've got a decent view of how somebody is progressing.
It's super interesting, actually, though, the different approaches that companies take, right? Because we've basically done the opposite and said, you know what, we changed the definition of skill. Skill is anything that enables you to do your job, right? So let's get away from the sort of HR and describe between a competency and a skill, and then there needs to be elements of competency, and that's great if you're developing trade skills and so forth that have to be evaluated and measured. But what we've said is a skill that you could always be an attribute, it could be experience, it could be knowledge, it could be and your skills profile is all of that. And we don't bother with the breakdown, and we don't bother with the necessarily we've got to focus on key skills. What we then do is say, now when all those skills come together and we graph them, you suddenly see these beautiful pictures of, we have so many people in our organisation who have customer service skill of some sort, right? Which is right, because we're a service-oriented organisation. Thumbs up, we're fine. But look at that, engineering, which is also a critical skill in our organisation, this tiny little pocket of engineering skills with no adjacent capabilities. And so suddenly, we never thought of that before. We need to be more targeted about engineers. We need to be getting onto Shell and saying, we want to steal your engineers from you. But it's just fascinating how companies take different approaches to these things.
But almost ending up in the same place, which is kind of, how can you use this to actually hunt for the people that can either be reskilled, recruited, whether you're build, buy, or borrow, where do you go for it?
And then if it's onto the skills development, what is the communities you foster there? I mean, it should not be like you sit in front of a computer and do this course. It's also this community of practices where you say, hey, how do you do it? And this is I think, is rather the learning spaces nowadays, which got a bit rid of being so virtual all the time. And I think we must not forget that there's practice out there, which needs the hands and the brain, and not just the hands.
Yeah, I love that.
Sorry, I got it now.
Yeah, it's catching.
It is dry.
Matthias, in terms of rollout and change management, can you describe how you introduced skills at Swisscom and how you expanded the effort?
So yeah, I think that's a great question, and I wouldn't start from a system point of view, but looking first at what the whole system of work is made up of: roles, processes, and technology obviously helps to scale it across the organization. And so we started to look at the learning systems, because that's my home function, and see where the engagement is all around, and try to piggyback on where the engagement is. The second thing is we started a big communication campaign around a narrative, and the narrative should be so broad enough that everyone of the workforce can identify with. So if you identify with something, you can also, it becomes the talk of the town, and it also requires leadership. So leadership and leaders that stand on the stage and also have a word to say around that. It's not just rolling it out silently. We used it more strategically and also with a narrative around the business transformation. And this ties back to this macro thing of, if you want to still be competitive in the telco industry, you would have to transform the whole business. And transformation is not, we had this example, transformation for an individual is going to the hairdresser and getting a new haircut, but transformation for a company is like everybody is taking a fair share of it and gets a new haircut.
Yeah. I think the other thing, what we've observed, and for the user, it doesn't seem to be such a big deal, right? It's exciting for them. They recognize it from the consumer world, this sort of, things that come to me because I've shared some information and it works, it's nice. For the management layer, it's been fascinating because they're very conflicted. I'm an employee as well, right? So I want this, but I don't want this because they're going to leave, right? And we rolled out a whole new leadership sort of paradigm and attributes and everything recently. One of the big things was trust. And now the rubber's hit the road, right? You've all watched the videos, attended the sessions. Now you've got to sit in front of your people and go, yes, of course, if you want to apply, you should, because, you have the skills. Please don't leave me. But they're not having those conversations today. They will tomorrow, because they'll realise that the old, we had a wonderful thing called recruiting etiquette, which had two sides: what the manager must do, what the employee must do. And guess which side was always applied? Yeah, so the employees had to give 12 months notice. The employees had to stay in the job for 2 years. The manager didn't have to do anything on their side. So it's really swapped that over now, and we get rid of the etiquette and things have improved. But the biggest change management challenge we have, and I don't think we have the same, was actually helping people recognise skill. So when we did the change readiness, we asked the question, so what are your biggest skills today? 80% of people could not say what their greatest skill was today in terms of the job they held at the moment.
Actually, one thing we've done to help a little bit with that is that we, at the end of each year, I'm sure you have all your own appraisal processes and so on, is we ask people to sit down and identify what are their 4 focus skills that they want to work on in the year ahead. And it just gets that conversation going between manager and team member as to, well, what are the skills that are really going to matter? And we say, look at those through 3 lenses. The first lens is think about your job. What are you trying to achieve over the next year? Second lens, of course, career. Where do you want to go next? What are going to be the skills that you need? And that kind of gets that trust piece going of kind of, well, I've got to think about that this person's not going to be with me forever. And third thing is we say, well, think about it through a company lens as well, because there's certain things that, and that's where we introduce the critical skills. We say, you don't have to pick one of these critical skills, but we're saying these do matter in Ericsson. So that's kind of.
And the key stakeholder, of course, is HR, and that's quite fascinating. That these are new skills. These are new skills for HR, right? So using skills is a new skill. But for example, our platform, so Cornerstone, has a really nice feature where when so the manager can see the skills that their employees are saying, and they can talk about those. This is great. They have check-ins and things. But one of the best things is actually when my employee does leave, they go, I also can see who are the next pipelined employees that are interested in the type of role that I have available. So you lose a bit that fear that nobody will want to come to me, because you can really see, yeah, there's 80% ready for my job. Secondly, when they sit with HR, because it doesn't get rid of recruiting, you still have to recruit, but when they sit with HR and have the conversation about what do you want from this job, which traditionally has been, I want this, and hand over the same role profile that's been used for 20 years. Now the conversation, look at a sort of graph which basically says, these are the skills you've got today, these are the skills that are in the market that others are looking for. And these are the people who fit those skills profiles. So the conversation becomes very mature about, are you wanting to stick with where you are today, or are you wanting to rather move towards something that's coming over I think there's a value add for HR. For me, this stuff adds value for HR. This is
and it makes it real. It? I mean, that's what it does. It makes it okay. There's some genuine value.
Yeah.
I was adding to Peter. So we also work with Degree, and the 4 focus skills. If we look into those, there's the one most profiles have is leadership. And then it's like, is it leading yourself? And this is like, not to boil the ocean, but I think it's very valuable to start also the individual into what do you really want as a worker from this company, from yourself, and what fits to you. And then you go out and venture. And obviously you fulfill obligations of what the contract and the skills and the job is all about. But if we atomize that towards skills, it becomes like, oh, what is my job? It's just this one skill, and then I can transfer it outside. And and I run my side business, and I reduce my capacity in the workforce. And this is what we also see at Swisscom, which is, on one hand, it's cool to see, okay, you can reduce the capacity to 80-60% and work on something you really care about that makes some money, I would say. And putting the handcuffs of corporate and the social elements around, like, what is the company made out of? People, culture, and there's a sense of belonging, and every company is different, and that makes also for many employees it difficult to leave.
And actually, it was interesting because someone earlier asked a question about what about content, right? Learning content, and I think this piece is something that becomes quite important. That the idea of a leadership course, it fundamentally changes now, because you're not looking for a leadership course, you're looking for specific leadership capabilities that you want to develop. And more it turns to that sort of, how do we put in place content that is targeted to the skills we're wanting to develop, within added into learning, pipelines or whatever you like,
I would add to that, building courses is also creating social elements of what work is about, and not just, if you start off with the journey bringing the best out of everybody, is it a one-to-one? I think from this meso level, it's also around this team dynamics you bring together to solve the wicked problems which you can't solve by yourself.
Which means that you then have to have very good learning data and metadata, and so that the concept of just developing learning without thinking about how am I going to make this learning visible. Actually, we need to all become a little bit sort of smart on how do we build this visibility for the recommendations to work the way they're meant to work. We can't just rely on, I wrote something and randomly it did get on the list.
Yeah, and skills to some extent are a little bit the key to that, because if you can get your meta tagging correct and so on in whatever system you're using that's making the recommendations, then and also it becomes the foundation for curation. It's so much of what we do now is moved on from pure content design and development to curation of content. And if the learning can be curated, and of course there's more automated ways of doing that, but whether you choose to automate or not, then the skills effectively enabled us to really have a much more focused skills journey, whatever it is.
And I think we will shift more to a content focus because it will automate in the end. The curation piece is super important. So don't get me wrong, I know how important curation is and we need that. But for average day-to-day learning, automate a whole lot. We're good. That's it.
I love it. So that was the end of our prepared questions. I'd like to open it up to the audience for our additional questions. Yeah. So we'll go here and then here.
So thank you for sharing the journeys there of very different businesses. So it felt like, as someone who's worked in big, small, right businesses, the barrier to entry for this feels really, really high at the moment, from an investment level, from a resource level, from everything you need to put behind it. So how accessible are skills, taxonomies, ontologies for smaller businesses, less mature businesses? Where would you even get started? Where would you get started?
Maybe I'll start.
Yeah,
it sounds like you've got to go and put out loads of stuff from you, and but it's really, you to some extent you can cut your cloth. And what I would say is that we need to get going on launching a new job architecture with new jobs and so on. We're not quite there. We're still experimenting with with auto-generated, externally sourced skills taxonomies, which is going to be expensive. So we take a pragmatic view. You can get the MC public catalogue of skills free of charge. You can, if you have an LXP, that LXP already has a catalogue of skills. You can fine tune it to what you want and put it back in that LXP. So it doesn't necessarily, it's almost kind of how far do you want to take this? So there are, if you like, more manually driven ways of achieving this. The challenge you get then is, of course, when the world moves on, when the skills moves on, how do you keep it up to date? And that is a bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, and I think I would also, my theory is that it's actually a lot easier for a smaller organisation. The investment is simply an investment choice, right? And they're no more expensive than having an LMS or having an LXP platform, right? It's not like they're crazy out of, or maybe one or two of them. But I think the fact is that what's expensive from both a resource and sort of financial perspective on our side is, one, the sheer size and complexity of our organisation and the change management that goes with that is multi-million-dollar sort of investment, right? The other thing is, when you look at why you need it, how important is it to the future of the business? How important is it to the retention of your employees? How important is it to ensuring that your R&D or whatever is, the value is clear. Like, I'm convinced the value is clear. If you're a startup, you do not want to be the one that, is sooner end of, I don't know what the opposite to a startup is, but the shutdown.
And I think this cultural aspect is also something. You don't need systems. And if you start this strategic review you do every now and then, what is the core of the company, what drives the values and the behaviors, and then multiply it with consistency, and then think about the systems. I think that's also a good start.
Thank you.
Hello, my question is about how you apply a skills approach to your learning platform, where that's so vastly different to what we mostly do today, particularly where you're trying to train on things that aren't necessarily skills, but are about the fundamental of how you do your job.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I would have to admit, on our side, we're still really trying to land how that's going to work. What we've done up until now is given two experiences for employees. One experience, which is what we call our career marketplace. It's the same platform, but their entry is through, embedded into our systems, an icon which says your career marketplace, and they go into the Explore platform, and that's where they experience this cool stuff. On the other hand, for compliance training, same platform, they click on complete my compliance training and they go to the other part. So from a sort of practical user experience point of view, that's the split. But the strategy is the bit we're still grappling with. How do we bring fully the experience that the employee has to mandatory trainings, whether that's certifications, versus those that I do for my growth and my career and my future? We're not quite there yet. And if you've got ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah. I think just while we're going to the next question, I think some of the recommendation engines, the LXPs and so on, need to stratify the skill profile better than they do currently. What are the skills I want to develop? What are the skills that my company wants to see that I develop? So I think there's more to go, I think, with some of these platforms to make it a better experience for the individual. I think, a little way to go.
And then query what the experience is, not like, did you like it?
Yeah.
I think we had it in another session from Peter from Novo Nordisk, the alternative to the happy sheet. So really going down the qualitative way of what people perceive or not.
Thank you. Quick question for each of you, I guess. How many skills are in your catalog? And the question behind the question is trying to think about the useful level of granularity. I guess it goes back to what the software is pushing in some cases. So you mentioned adjacent skills and transversal skills. So my question is it 30 skills? Is it 3,000 skills? So
for us, it's on the job catalog side, so on the reference job side. We've got 1,300 reference jobs, and each of those has no more than 20 skills. On the employee side, where they create their profile, it's unlimited. Like, it's whatever skills are there. It's thousands and tens of thousands of skills.
So pretty much the same from our perspective. So in those global critical skills I was talking about, there's a very limited skill catalogue in there. But when you're talking about the skills, either for the individual or for the job architecture, even this interim catalogue that we are putting together now, it's, I think, in excess of 15,000 skills. So, I mean, we're talking, and to be honest, we kept it down to a manageable level. So it's, and to some extent, that's why you need a level of automation. Because not only there's huge quantity of skills, because if you do this really properly, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of skills, and they're changing.
We have the aspect of the multi-language workforce. So we have Italian skills, French. So the not French skills, but in French translated. I think this ties also back to the culture of what do people understand of what the skill really is. And maybe one thing to add, the skills list we have in our system, our vendor said, we will make it bigger for you. And not sure whether we like it or not. So from 2,000 to 10,000, it's like, okay, how do you manage it? And then you have to build capacity around automation, or you just leave it all the way. And last but not least, we use endorsements. So we say, hey, this is something we can reference. Yeah.
Okay, so hello. Thank you for sharing your journeys. Honestly, it was really inspiring. I think this is definitely the direction of travel. And you're already quite far along. I see you sort of pioneering organizations in that regard. But I'm just wondering, there's probably lots of people in the audience who haven't even started. And part of this is getting the investment from the senior leadership, right? And time and the resource that it requires to get this right. So I'm wondering, where did the journey start in your respective companies, and who started it, and how did you sort of sell it internally, if you know what I mean?
I can kick off if you like. So thank you, Amanda. We started with pain points. So the sort of thing that had started around kind of the 9,000, what are their skills? So we started trying to solve specific pain points, and starting with trying to solve a business problem, I think, is a good place to start. We also, at the same time, I don't know whether I do this again or not, but we also started in saying, well, we want to design what we want to see as well. So we kind of started with a level of design to say, okay, how will we build this kind of job and skills architecture? And one of the things that we wanted was for jobs to be less siloed and connected with skills. I.e., you connect a job to a skill area. You don't just connect it to a job family. And that helps identify transferable skills and so on. So I think I would definitely suggest start with a business problem, but also maybe at the same time start to think where you get in terms of design.
Yeah. For us, it was a little bit different. So actually, Comp and Ben, I mentioned earlier that Comp and Ben came with the request, did we have a use case for skills? And we, sort of at the VP level, so we just run a proof of concept. So just 3 months, 3 vendors will run a proof of concept. And it was so incredibly powerful doing that experience and understanding all of the key things that we could gain out of it. And then at the end of it, we put together a bit of a business case. We basically said we save money on learning, on administration, on the onboarding, on on turnover, on engagement. There's a whole list. There's about 20 factors that we could identify in money savings or value contribution. And then the discussion sort of came to the board, and what was fascinating is exactly at that time that we went to the board, I think it was Unilever, the CEO of Unilever, that said, they had this skill, and it's saying that exactly at that moment it was perfect, because then we walked in there and Frank Appel, CEO, said, "Oh yeah, I know, at Davos," and I was like, so we got the go ahead, but it was a bit of a sort of wild horse, to be honest. I think today we would do it slightly differently, and we have a lot more science around it. But I think the other interesting thing from our perspective was, at the time, Cornerstone had just acquired Plustric, which was actually our preferred vendor at the time. And so we were kind of taking a leap of faith that it would all go ahead as it should and did, so that was quite fascinating. No, it wasn't a hard sell.
Yeah, for us it was, and I think I perceive it as a broader transformation theme. So possibly we started 5 or 6 years ago with introducing agile working modes to the organization. And we would know by that time that we cause lots of flexibility and lots of breaking down of silos and management structures, and to helping employees to recognize what that means for them. We came up with this employability calculator. This helped them to calculate on a very qualitative basis what the likeliness of employability it was by that time for them. It was pretty stupid actually, by saying how mobile are you in terms of location, and how mentally flexible are you? Could you think about working in the customer service department or somewhere else? And then we didn't touch that data, so this was left by the employees. And next to it, we also provided the possibility to add like a skills profile and look into the job market internally. What is the matching score of what you have today for a possible future? And I think this was no data science attached, it's more like referencing and comparing, reflecting on where you are before you build out like systems that automate and hypothesize and assume also stuff about the workforce. And so for us, it was starting at the employee, given this contextual factor of transformation.
But in all cases, you were the instigators, right?
Yeah.
The question was, in all cases, are you the instigators?
Yeah.
It was in our case, it was actually Reward or Comp and Ben that was working on it at the same time as we were, and then we said, hold on here, let's join forces.
we had a hilarious thing where we have a top executive management meeting and big fancy event, and the CHRO stood up there and said, "What I want to see is like a talent Tinder." You know, and it was like, oh, that was actually the thing that made us go off and look for talent Tinder. Can you believe that?
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
So did you find the tenant in that?
Yeah.
Thank you for your insights. I've got a question, and I don't believe you've done it yet, but how are you going to provide for, because you've got a current state now, you've allocated and identified and then allocated skills, right? You've got a desired state that you hope to achieve. How do you allocate skills according to priority and also according to proficiency distribution? Have you thought about that in one of your plans?
Yeah. So you're right, we're not there yet. It's a really important question though, because for me that's the strategic impact that this has beyond the employee's experience and all those other nice to have. The skills graph capabilities will offer that, right? So you'll be able to, and we have a lot to learn about how that really works, but we will be able to look at what are the priority skills coming up, what are the current skills profiles that we have in an aggregated format, and how can we intentionally transition on a sort of macro level the skill groups across into different profiles. I think that's one side. The other one is the proficiency piece, which is already embedded into our product. So actually we already have the ability to, or there's an algorithm that already understands by looking at things like, and I won't do it justice, I'm sure, but things like longevity, previous roles, other skills that are suggested what the likely proficiency levels of individuals are. And what we will build on that is then a sort of validation, social validation, the sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, but also the manager and confirmation piece, which is super important. But that for us is still, we wanted to get them in at first before we start then making them feel like someone's watching. So,
yeah, slightly different approach from us. So we currently have over 90 job role openings, and we're thinking actually what we want to do going forward is to have skill area owners. So we don't just distribute that responsibility for the job role. We distribute the responsibility to key people to understand what are the key skill relationships, what are the new skills coming in, and to actively work with those skill areas. And if the job area owners work effectively with the skill areas owners, we kind of hope that's a kind of match made in heaven. So that's what we want to try and achieve. And we don't know whether that'll work. It's not done yet. So as everybody's pointing out, we're all on a journey, and it's which means we're not there.
Thank you. So I can see everybody. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you so much to the three panelists. I learned a lot during this session. I hope you did too. And I appreciate it, just very much appreciated the collegiality. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.